Over the last few weeks, something unusual happened to football. Every Argentina match seemed to produce two completely different games. The first was played on the pitch, the second was played online. By the time the referee blew the final whistle, millions of people had already begun arguing over a version of the match that existed almost entirely on their phones. Refereeing decisions became conspiracy theories, aggressive tackles became evidence of corruption, 15-second clips traveled further than 90 minutes of football. Genuine controversies, fabricated quotes, and AI-generated images all competed for the same thing: your attention. Within days, one team had become football's biggest villain. Not everyone agreed on why. Some believed Argentina had been favored by referees. Others objected to the way they played. Some simply wanted Lionel Messi to fail. Others brought politics, religion, and old rivalries into a tournament that was supposed to be about football. This documentary isn't here to tell you whether those feelings were right or wrong. It's here to understand why emotion almost always travels faster than evidence, and why, in the age of social media, a footballer can become far more than an athlete. Lionel Messi is the lens through which we're going to tell this story, but the story itself is much bigger than one footballer, because this isn't really a documentary about football, it's a documentary about us. Long before hashtags, algorithms, and artificial intelligence, football had already discovered one uncomfortable truth: the game has never been satisfied with heroes alone. Every generation crowns its champions, but it also creates its villains. Sometimes they deserve the reputation, sometimes they don't. Most of the time, the truth lies somewhere in between. What rarely changes is our need to reduce a complicated story into something much simpler: heroes to celebrate, villains to blame. Argentina wasn't the first team to find itself in that position. It almost certainly won't be the last. History is full of them. David Beckham had barely turned 23 when a moment of frustration against Argentina changed his life. One kick at Diego Simeone earned him a red card, England were eliminated, and Beckham returned home to a country looking for someone to blame. Newspapers turned him into the face of the defeat. Effigies were burned. Death threats followed. A player who had been one of England's brightest young stars suddenly became public enemy number one. Not because of 90 minutes of football alone, but because millions of disappointed supporters needed an explanation that fit into a single face. The pattern kept repeating. Cristiano Ronaldo spent much of his career dividing football supporters almost as effectively as he united them. To millions, he represented relentless ambition and impossible standards. To millions of others, he became the symbol of arrogance, diving, selfishness, and manufactured celebrity. The football never changed. The interpretation did. In 1986, Diego Maradona produced what many still consider the greatest individual World Cup performance in history. Against England, he scored one of the most extraordinary goals football has ever witnessed, weaving past half the opposition as though the ball were tied to his feet. A few minutes earlier, however, he had deliberately punched the ball into the net, a goal that should have been disallowed, but wasn't. That moment became known as the Hand of God. For England, it came to symbolize one of football's most infamous acts of cheating. For many Argentines, the match came to represent something far more complicated, shaped by the recent memory of the Falklands War and Maradona's extraordinary display that day. 40 years later, the same 90 minutes still provoke completely different emotions depending on who's remembering them. None of these stories were invented. They all contained real moments, real tackles, real mistakes, real controversies. That's what made them so powerful. The strongest narratives are almost never built on complete fiction. They usually begin with something true: a controversial handball, a reckless challenge, a poor refereeing decision. Then, over time, that single moment grows into a reputation. Eventually, every new incident is interpreted through the reputation that came before it. Football has always worked this way. The difference is that for most of its history, those reputations spread at the speed of newspapers, television highlights, and conversations between supporters. The 2026 World Cup unfolded in a completely different world. Every controversy reached millions of people within minutes. By the final week of the tournament, the internet had already reached its verdict. Argentina weren't simply a great football team anymore. They were cheats. Every match seemed to produce another piece of evidence. Scroll through almost any football page during the tournament and the accusations were remarkably consistent. FIFA's princess? Messi. Infantino won't let him lose. Another robbery. Some posts received millions of views before most people had even watched the full highlights. And that's where this story becomes interesting. Because not every accusation was ridiculous, some decisions genuinely divided opinion, some probably still do. Take Messi's challenge on Algeria's Issa Mandi. Algeria's federation was furious enough to file a formal complaint with FIFA over it, and more than a few pundits, including ESPN's own post-match review, argued it should have been a straight red. Others pointed to the VAR check, the angle, the fact that a foul was at least given, and called it a defensible if fortunate outcome for Messi. Reasonable people can disagree with that decision. Football has always produced moments like these because refereeing isn't mathematics, it is interpretation. The same applies to almost every major controversy that surrounded Argentina. The disallowed Egypt goal, the debate around the Cape Verde match, claims that Argentina had been handed the easiest route through the knockout stages. Old incidents resurfaced as fresh evidence. Messi's handball against the Netherlands in 2022 was suddenly back on millions of screens. The argument wasn't about one tournament anymore. It became a 20-year case file, assembled from hundreds of clips spanning different competitions, different referees, and different eras. Viewed individually, each incident invites discussion. Viewed together, they begin telling a completely different story. That distinction matters, because football has never been free from controversial officiating. Ask England supporters about Frank Lampard's goal against Germany in 2010. Ask Chelsea supporters about Andres Iniesta at Stamford Bridge in 2009. Ask Barcelona and Real Madrid supporters about almost any Clásico from the Mourinho-Guardiola era. Football history is littered with decisions that still divide opinion decades later. The same was true of this World Cup. Every new incident was immediately attached to every previous one until the individual details became almost irrelevant. The narrative had become self-sustaining. Worth noting, Argentina didn't even win. It's the one result in the whole story that doesn't fit the theory. It didn't slow the accusations down either. Take one of the tournament's most viral formats, the moment he realized, a still image, a dramatic soundtrack, a caption added after the fact. Millions watched those clips without ever asking a simple question. Realized what? The photographs were real, the emotions were real, the captions weren't evidence, they were interpretations. Yet, once an interpretation is repeated often enough, the brain quietly stops treating it as one. It starts treating it as memory. That's exactly how a footballer slowly stops being judged by individual matches and starts being judged by a story. Long before football existed, the human brain had already developed a habit that would shape almost every decision we make. Our ancestors didn't have the luxury of analyzing every situation from every possible angle. Survival depended on making quick judgments, friend or foe, safe or dangerous, stay or run. Those shortcuts helped us survive. They also came with a flaw. Once the brain settles on a story, it becomes remarkably good at finding reasons to believe it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. The name sounds complicated. The idea isn't. If someone tells you a restaurant has terrible food, you'll notice every mistake the waiter makes. If they tell you it's the best restaurant in town, you'll forgive those same mistakes without thinking twice. Nothing changed except the story you believed before you walked through the door. Football is no different. If you already believe Argentina are being favored, every controversial penalty feels like proof. Every refereeing decision becomes another piece of evidence. Every missed call against Argentina quietly disappears into the background, and the opposite is true as well. Argentina supporters remember the fouls that weren't given, the decisions that went against them, the moments everyone else ignored. Neither side is necessarily lying. They're simply watching the same match through two different stories. Here's the part the story never mentions. Somebody's getting paid for this. Not Messi, not Argentina, the platforms. Every app on your phone is built around one number, how long you stay, and nothing keeps a thumb from scrolling like a feeling you can't quite let go of. Researchers who study how information spreads online have noticed the same pattern for years. Content built on anger and disgust tends to travel further and faster than content built on admiration. A beautiful piece of skill gets a like and a scroll past. A slowed down clip of a referee's hand brushing Messi's shoulder gets a stitch. A duet, a comment section that runs for 600 replies. Nobody sat in a room and designed the algorithm to hate Argentina specifically. It doesn't need to. It just needs to notice, in real time, which version of a moment keeps people watching, and give the world more of that version. A clean tackle doesn't trend. A tackle with a slow motion replay, a red arrow, and the caption "Watch this" does. So the internet doesn't really decide what to be angry about. It gets shown what already made someone else angry, and it agrees because agreeing is faster than checking. That's how 4 or 5 incidents from an entire tournament end up being cut, recut, and reposted by accounts that have never watched a full 90 minutes, until the same 6-second clip has been seen by more people than actually watched the match live. By the time someone might go looking for it, the next clip has already arrived. None of this required a single person to lie. It only required a system that rewards the version of the truth that moves the fastest. There's one more version of this story, and it doesn't need a villain at all. It just needs 2 names in the same sentence, Messi or Ronaldo. 2 players born 2.5 years apart on opposite sides of an ocean who spent 2 decades pushing each other into territory neither one might have reached alone. Somewhere along the way it turned into something else. A war that needed a loser. Watch the comment section under almost any Messi highlight, and you'll find someone bringing up Ronaldo uninvited. Watch a Ronaldo hat trick and someone will mention Messi's penalties. Neither man asked for the comparison in that moment. It arrives anyway because for a certain kind of fan, loving one has quietly become inseparable from needing to diminish the other. That's worth sitting with for a second because it isn't really about football. If Messi's brilliance were self-evident, nobody watching him would need Ronaldo to be a fraud. If Ronaldo's numbers spoke for themselves, nobody would need Messi's trophies to be the product of a fix. The players themselves have mostly refused to play this game. They've spoken about each other with more generosity than most of their fans ever manage. It's the crowd that keeps insisting there has to be a loser, because a rivalry without a winner and a loser doesn't feel as satisfying to argue about at 2 in the morning. 2 players changed the sport for 20 years. That's the whole story. Everything added on top of it came from somewhere else. 3 years before any of this, before the red cards, the penalty debates, the AI-generated princesses, there was a bus in Buenos Aires that never finished its route. Millions of people poured onto the thoroughfares, highways, and overpasses of the capital, trying to catch a glimpse of the team that had just won one of the greatest World Cup finals ever played. The crowd grew so large, the players had to abandon the open-top bus entirely and finish the parade in helicopters, flying low over a city that had turned its streets into an ocean of blue and white. 4 million people in a country of 46 million, all standing outside for a game that had ended 2 days earlier. Some Argentine outlets put the figure closer to 5 million. Nobody was in a position to count exactly. None of those millions were arguing about a penalty. Nobody in that crowd was slowing down a clip to check a referee's hand. They weren't there for a conspiracy or a rivalry or a rumor. They were there because a man who grew up too small for his age, in a city far from anywhere football's power lives, had spent his whole career trying to bring something home. And for one Sunday in Qatar, he did. The internet will always have a version of Messi that needs debunking. A princess, a fraud, a symbol of something he never claimed to be. That version is loud and it travels fast, and it will still be online, long after this tournament is forgotten. But it was never the real one. The real one was on a bus that couldn't move. move, surrounded by a country that had waited 36 years to feel exactly what it felt that week, and didn't need a single headline to explain why.